Well, thanks for coming. We looked at the analytics for the registrants for the room. It was a sold-out room, so maybe some more folks will be coming in. But we saw 20 different industries. We saw 150 different companies. And there's only 160 seats. That tells me that not everybody wants to bring their coworker to this session because they don't want their coworker to think we have culture problems. So you're keeping it a secret for now. That's good. We saw that there were about 75% of you are in leadership positions. That you manage teams, you manage people. But I think we're all here for one reason, and it's we agree that the heavy lifting, the title of the session, behind digital transformation is cultural. And when I joined VMware a few years ago, when Joseph joined VMware a few years ago, I think we joined for the technology. Thought this is a really cool place to work. Look at all this technology. But we had the luxury of talking to all the biggest companies across the States and in Latin America and Canada. And we typically find that they all agree that we have really disruptive technology that does really disruptive things. And the cultural side of implementing these things is the hardest challenge. I did a couple of dinners, CDW hosted dinners on the West Coast, about 40 customers in each one of these things. And we passed the microphone around the room and asked them, what's the hardest thing? 80% cultural. He did a Twitter survey recently. Same thing, right? Mm-hmm. So kudos to you for coming here, because I think this, if you're going to implement culture change inside your IT organization, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of self-reflection too as leaders, because it's going to start with you. So it's, you know, the technology won't go anywhere without this stuff. Forgot to introduce ourselves, by the way. Craig Fletcher, I'm a director of solution architecture for VMware. Been in the industry 24 years, and I have spent 20 of those years on your side of the house. I had the pleasure of being a CTO for a Fortune 400 business the last 4 years of my career before coming to VMware. So I definitely have been through this, and I know what it feels like to be on your side of the house. Joseph?
Joseph Griffiths. I'm a solutions architect with VMware. I've got 10 plus years in the industry. I have the honor of being a double VMware certified design expert, which is VMware's highest certification. So it's safe to say that I'm fairly technology plugged in with the technical side of the house, yet I'm up here talking about culture. Think about that as we start to talk today.
And hopefully he'll be at triple soon. He'll be one of less than 10 of those in the world. So yeah, he's real technical. Here's the disclaimer. We're actually not going to talk about any VMware products, I don't think, at all today. So I think we're good here. So we have an hour, and we're going to solve all your cultural challenges in an hour. Right? That's obviously a joke. Done deal. Now, any of these topics and then the subtopics within them are typically delivered in multi-day workshops and take months and years to really set in. So there'll be slivers within each topic. And what my hope is that these are things you can take action on. You can get the deck later and look back over it and let it sink in, because there's going to be a lot of stuff, a lot of different actionable things. Some of this stuff you will have already done, you're well down the road. Some of it hopefully is going to be some new ideas. Now, this is supposed to make you laugh a little bit. You might cry, you might want to punch us, because some of this stuff it's going to feel personal, because it's about us. It's about human behavior. And years ago, you know, just even 3 years ago when I started at VMware and I was talking to my customers, they were saying the same things they're saying now a lot of times. And this is one of the offensive things, is we're trying DevOps, but the teams don't communicate. Or, yeah, we're playing with containers, but we're just not there yet. Or we want to go faster, and we feel like we're kind of failing our developers, and that's why we have runaway public cloud expenditures, right? Which is not the best reason why to use public cloud. So we're hearing the same things now. And I think in order to change your culture, one thing I want you to write down or take away, remember, is you have to be very intentional about it. Very intentional about it. Because you all have 100 different projects that you want to deliver to the business, or that the business is asking you to do. And when I was a CTO, we built something called our plan of record. And I went around to all the business units and all the IT folks, and I said, what do we need to do, or what does the business need us to do? I remember we had 163 things on the list. That was exactly how many. So I got everybody in a room, a CIO was with me, and we chopped 90% of those things off the list. Maybe later, maybe someday, but we can't do 163 things. But you know what wasn't at the top of our list? If I could go back in time and do this again, culture change. And if you're not intentional about this, and if this isn't on the top of your list, if it gets chopped, 3 years from now you're going to probably be saying the same thing. And that's not what we want. So a little inspiration here. The secret of success is being uncomfortable. People that are successful with culture change, because changing culture is uncomfortable, they get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's what you're going to have to do, because changing the way people think and act is odd, right? You can implement all sorts of technical things and hybrid cloud automation and all these great things, but we're trying to change the way people think and act. That's uncomfortable. And we want to start by defining terms. I want to define what culture means. Now, this might seem fundamental, but if somebody ran up to you in the hallway and said, what does culture mean? You'd probably pause, right? I know I did. So I looked up different sources of what does culture mean. Some corporate coaching books, a CEO friend of mine looked on Wikipedia. You see all these different definitions, but they all say the same thing. Culture is about the way people think, what people believe, and their behaviors. So that's what we're talking about today. So if that's not what you wanted to hear about today, then bad session for you, because that's what we're going to talk about. Now, why does culture matter? Why is this important? And I have a really good case study for why it's important later, but people leave their jobs a lot of times because they didn't like the culture. People love working at VMware because they love the culture. So attracting and retaining talent is really important, because I spend a whole lot of time recruiting and hiring and interviewing. We all do in leadership positions at VMware. So it takes a lot of time. So if you have a good culture, people are going to want to work there. Obviously, top line, bottom line revenue, financial performance, culture has been proven to yield a more profitable business. Culture's free. It's maybe not free in time, but you don't have to go buy culture products, right? You're changing the way people think and behave. And you will have a competitive advantage. You will outpace your competitors if you have a strong culture. So that's why culture matters. There's probably a lot more reasons. Now, what is digital transformation? Digital transformation, to me, I quoted myself, which is very arrogant, by the way, on the far right. This is where your business's growth plan, your go-to-market plan, from the CEO and the board on down, involves technology capabilities. That's what I think digital transformation is. IT can do their own digital transformation, but if you're not sponsored from above to make your business more profitable, I don't think that's what we're talking about. So we're talking about the way people think and the way people act integrated with this. These are new business methods, new technology methods to solve traditional business problems that are preferred over the old methods. So now we know what we're talking about when we say culture and digital transformation. Now, I was talking about surveys earlier. This is from 3 years ago. This is a Gartner survey. What's holding you back? In this particular case, it's IaaS, a real frictionless consumption model for cloud services on premises, right? Something that most customers I've talked to are still, 95% of them aren't there. 90% of them aren't there. The technology's there though, right? Like, we can do this. We can have software-defined data centers across clouds. But look at that. All those top reasons have nothing to do with technology. Now, what went wrong when you did try it? So on the left is, why aren't you going to try it? What went wrong when you did try it? On the right, the top 3 categories, they're not technology. So I'm re-emphasizing the point. Now, you can have a really, really good digital transformation strategy, but if you don't have good culture, Peter Drucker says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have the best execution plan, the best roadmap, future state outcomes. These are the challenges. This is how we're going to deal with them. But if you leave out culture, it doesn't matter. And this little equation, this very complex math equation in the lower right-hand corner, culture 1, that's today's culture, gives you results 1. Culture 1 won't give you results 2, right? So that's a really, you can put that in your hallways at work. People will remember, hopefully. Joseph?
Yeah. I want to illustrate what Craig's been talking about a little bit with a customer example. I had the opportunity yesterday to sync up with some coworkers that I worked with about 3 years ago. And they work for a state agency that has consolidated all IT together. And they had a manager who set the culture at the manager level. And because he set the culture at that level, that team became a high-performing team. And those of you who work with state and local government will understand that there's very little incentivization to be high-performing in that market at all. But that group was incredibly high performing, and they're still high performing today because of that. I mean, I was just talking to their technical account manager a few minutes ago, and he told me about some of the initiatives they're doing, and they are on the cutting edge of adopting public clouds, on the cutting edge of automation. They're on the cutting edge of solving a lot of the problems that we're talking about today, and it was all done because they had a culture, because there was no way to money incentivize those people. There was no way to change the way that they win as a group. It was because they have a culture of working together and winning together. And that made the difference. It's really critical when I start to think about it. So by a raise of hands, can I get a raise of hands of those of you in the room who feel like your enterprise IT is going to be 30% public cloud in the next 5 years?
Or more?
Or more. Yeah? Okay. About 25 to 30% of the room just did that. So my supposition is this. That
I thought that'd be a much bigger number, by the way.
Me too, actually. But it's always good to get a real poll in the room, right? When I start to think about enterprise IT, we are at a precipice. A lot of enterprise IT is sitting like this guy hanging off the cliff. And the precipice we're at is that we have the old way of doing business. And there's new models, new tools, new technology that's coming, right? But technology does not, and tools do not equal culture. So how do we adopt that? So what we commonly see is we commonly see customers in this current state. They're universally thought of as being slow. There's a number of business-led or rogue IT initiatives out there, cloud initiatives, right? There is a lack of understanding of the applications and the business value of those applications by the infrastructure people, or even by the application people at times. There's lots of siloed teams, set in functional models with specialists and subject matter experts in every one of those things. And a majority of the applications are living on-prem today. Now, if you're hanging off that cliff like this guy is, I don't want to scare anybody. That's not my desire, but you have a choice. Hold on as long as you can and eventually fall, or climb, right? So one potential future state is this that we see commonly with our customers. Majority of their data is going to be in some sort of public cloud and multi-cloud. Corporate IT goes down. They become orchestrators of external contracts. They become enablers of lines of business. Everything goes subscription model, and ultimately we end up with a lot less team. The people go down. That's one potential outcome. Let's talk about another one. So here we have the hope slide. This is what happens when someone reaches down, initiates cultural changes, and lifts them up. Same common starting state. The potential outcome is that we build things that are on-premise as good as public. We utilize public cloud when it makes sense for business reasons in every respect. IT becomes a business partner and a driver. Think about Netflix, right? Versus Blockbuster. IT is a business driver. IT becomes something that drives revenue, brings new revenue innovation to the table and opportunities to make money. And we really start to get to the transparent digital world that we're talking about. We have on-premise, we have clouds, we have value-added roles, and we'll talk about some of those roles in a minute. So at the end of the day, it really is a choose-your-own-adventure.
Remember those books? Choose-your-own-adventure books?
We love choose-your-own-adventures, come on. So you've got the choice. Keep the lights on, hang on to that rope and hope you can hold on, and be one of the people that are still hanging off the cliff, or go partner. Go build those lines of business. You have a choice which way you want to go. And I would suggest to you that the difference between A and B is culture. What kind of a culture are you going to build inside of your IT organization? You're going to build one that is collaborative, that understands the things that we're going to be talking about here in a minute, or not? As you take a look at it, we're going to talk about 4 towers that affect cultural change. We're going to talk about people's resistance to change. I don't think we could have one of these without having a discussion of that, right? At the end of the day. We're going to talk about processes, legacy processes and their challenges. We're going to talk about team organization models, and we're going to talk about KPIs and how all of those affect culture holistically.
Okay, so that's the preamble. Now we're going to get into actionable things that you can do, right? Instead of telling you everything's bad, but it's not. Choose your own adventure, right? Okay, so a culture of change. I have the pleasure of knowing this guy. He's a good friend of mine. He's turned around multiple businesses. He is the CEO of ClearChoice, and He is all about culture change. His first focus is culture change. He's turned around, I think, 4 companies now, backed by action, and he's very intentional about separating with cultural mismatches, or he even used a worse word. He said cultural misfits. So he said once they defined their values, their vision, their purpose, and their operating principles, which is things they do, they would separate with people that wouldn't do it, which is the hard part. That's the offensive part. Remember the little kid who's going to punch you in the face and make you cry? He's not afraid to make people cry, apparently, but it works. That came out harshly. I'm sorry about that, because there is a way to fix these problems. What he does early on, and what he did at ClearChoice, was they did a culture survey done by Human Synergistics. It's the OCI. It's the Organizational Culture Inventory. And we are recommending, if you're going to be intentional about culture, that you do something like this. You define your culture, and I'll walk you through how to do that in a second, and you survey your people. And you're going to find that there are people that are going to actively resist change. I think we all know that. I think we've all been there before ourselves, right? It's uncomfortable. It's just hard work, you know? Just like getting in great shape. It's hard work. I go to the gym. It's hard. So I'm not saying you separate with all those people, right? But if you're going to change, and your change is going to have outcomes that are process, technological, KPI oriented, these people could stay with you for a while and do things the old way, but eventually time's going to run out. I think the people in the middle need guidance. They'll do it, they just don't know how to do it, then maybe they don't understand it. And then you're going to have your champions on the far right, and this is like any bell curve, right? And your champions are where you want to launch your first initiatives. These are the people that are going to get started, these are the people that are going to get rewarded, these are the people you're going to pair up with each other. Now these are the results that Kevin got. I could talk about his case study for a long time, but these are the results. In 5 years, revenue tripled. This was a business that was flat for many years, by the way. Revenue tripled. EBITDA went up 100 times, from 500K to 50 million. And revenue growth, the first year is up 10%, and now it's up 330%. All right, so very, very good tangible results. Now, here are, these are psychological aspects to culture change. But remember, it's about what people believe and what people do. And so we're not talking about traits. A lot of people think that that stuff's not for me. I wasn't born that way. That's not my skill. You know, I'm not going to do software-defined automation, all these, you know, high-speed, high-yield things. That's not how my brain works. That's not a trait. A trait is like you have blue eyes and you're, you know, 5'11", and, you know, those are traits. That's in your DNA. There are some behavioral traits. What we're talking about is skills. You know, my son never skated before in his life. And he just picked up hockey in January. And my son's 10, and all the other kids started when they were 4 years old. So I had this growth mindset conversation with him. I said, you need to be on the ice 5 days a week, working twice as hard as everybody else, or you're never going to make the team, right? And there's no one's going to come along and do it for you. You don't need to go to a special class. This is on-the-job training, right? And the same is true in IT, too. So we're going to talk about skills that are learned, developed, and honed. And who's heard of the book Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck? It's well known by now, right? Yeah, most of you probably. So it probably gets old talking about it. I don't think it does. I think you could talk about this book every other day for the next year. I think this is the most important thing, besides what people believe about themselves in terms of the what we think side of culture, is this growth mindset idea. And if you only took one thing away from this, it's not only understanding the difference between fixed and growth mindset, but it's coaching on it, it's looking for it, it's having performance conversations about it, it's making hiring decisions about it. If you want to change your culture, people need to think differently. Now, people are born, human beings are born. Dweck did studies for 30 years. And basically, babies and newborns and children, they are born with growth mindset. They're born not afraid to not know the answer. They raise their hand and they say, why? You know, little kids, all your parents, why? They want to know. They have a growth mindset. What happens, though, to people is a fixed mindset becomes developed because and it's by parents, it's by teachers, it's by the elders of the kids. And this happens in IT, too. People get rewarded for being smart. Wow, you're really smart. You know that thing really, really well, right? they don't get rewarded for their level of effort. And if they're not good at something, it's not keep trying, failure is an opportunity. It's, well, you really screwed that up, and then they're afraid to be wrong, so they don't raise their hand in class anymore. Right? So the good news is, though, we're born with growth mindsets. A lot of our mindsets get changed to fixed because we're taught wrong about failure. But the good news is this can be reversed. This can be reversed for you. This can be reversed for your teams. I've had to reverse it myself. We can look at different characteristics of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset to help you understand and remind you what this is about. Fixed mindset people are going to avoid challenges. And by the way, mindset has, in IT, mindset has a lot to do with soft skills too. The ability to have a business conversation is a skill set you have to learn, right? The ability to relate to other people is probably going to get people further along in their IT career than knowing how to wire the most amazing network the world's ever seen, right? So it doesn't just apply to technology. And in fact, sometimes VMware does a lot of disruptive stuff, and a lot of times when I'm doing customer workshops and meetings, and I bring up some of these disruptive, game-changing things that VMware does, customers will fold their arms and almost get mad at me. My network's fine. I don't need a fully automated software to find anything, you know. And they literally, like, they can't wait for me to leave. The growth mindset people are, hey, tell me more about that. How does that work? They don't say we're a Cisco shop. No offense to Cisco, but what does that even mean? Your whole career is tied to a single vendor? Unless it's VMware, that doesn't make any sense.
Well played.
Thanks for laughing, because I didn't want to get in trouble for that. Okay, all of that was off script. So fixed mindset people avoid challenges. Growth mindset people embrace challenges. I'm going to learn how to build a software-defined, fully automated world. I've never populated an XML file or YAML. I don't even know what YAML means. I've never written a script, but I'm going to figure it out. Fixed mindset people give up easily. I'm not going to go do that because I'm already so awesome at this. I don't need to go learn that new thing because I'm the guy. Growth mindset people say, you know what, I'm going to keep trying until I get it. I'm going to keep trying until I get it. These are the people you want to look for in your organization. That's what you want to look for in yourself. Fixed mindset people see failure as fruitless. I'm not going to do something I know isn't going to go well. There's no sense in doing that. Growth mindset people say, that did not work. I tried it, but I learned something from it. And I'm going to go find somebody who knows how to do that, and I'm going to get better at that thing. Fixed mindset people say, how dare you tell me that I suck at giving presentations at VMworld? You're no better. Growth mindset people say, thank you for your feedback. Next time I'll make my presentation better. You're right about that. I did pace back and forth too much. Fixed mindset people say, these people that are more successful than me, the guy next to me who got promoted because it's the CIO's buddy. Special treatment. It's bogus. Growth mindset people say, that guy got promoted. That girl got promoted. How did they get promoted? I want to go have lunch with them. I want to ask them questions. I want to learn from that person. You can see there's a big difference here, right? Now, this is another, this thing's on delay here, sorry. This is another thing about accountability versus victimhood. This is my friend Kevin taught me this concept, ILOC versus ELOC. And he said, you know, he's a CEO, right? So when he meets with his direct reports, they call him out on this sometimes. This is a locus of control. We all have two locus of controls in our mind. Because remember, we're talking culture and what people think about, how they believe. Internal locus of control means I'm responsible. I'm going to create a better future for my organization. I own this. External means the reason why this isn't working, the reason why digital transformation isn't working is the business doesn't understand how IT can help them. Which, by the way, if anybody's going to understand the other, it's IT is going to have to be the first mover in this relationship, right? We're going to have to learn that. Your CFO is not all of a sudden going to go, so tell me about this cross-cloud architecture. This sounds really great. Right? This is never going to happen. So I hear people a lot say the reason why we're not moving forward in IT in my organization is because the business doesn't get it. Well, they're never going to get it, right? So ILOC versus ELOC. Now, people's potential, people in your organization's potential, and your organization's potential itself is based on primarily what they believe their potential is. Now, let's just say that Joseph has a lot of potential, and I know that. I used to manage Joseph, and it was a pleasure, by the way, sir. And I know he has a lot of potential, but he doesn't believe that about himself. Being a solution architect at VMware is really hard. It's for other people. I'm in the wrong job. So his potential's there, but his beliefs aren't there. How much action is he going to take? And going out and doing the new, challenging things we've asked him to do. Going out and learning microservices, for example. Not going to take very much action, right? Because he doesn't believe that that's his skill set. What are his results going to be if he doesn't take much action? This is very basic, but it's very important because you have people in your organization that don't believe these new behaviors are for them. They're not taking much action because of that. They're getting bad results, and then you get the death spiral because this sucker feeds on itself, right? And here's what happens. It happens over and over again, and they say, see, I told you that that wouldn't work. I told you that we wouldn't figure that out. And so that feeds into the beliefs again, little action, results. We stagnate. All of a sudden, we're caught doing the same thing for 10 years. Let's look at this again. Now, let's say something came along and made you believe that you had unlimited potential, nearly unlimited potential. Which, by the way, when people don't believe in themselves, the question is, well, how do you fix that? That's a tough one. I think the way that, a couple things I say, I believe that can help people believe differently about themselves, better and higher about themselves, is their leader believes in them, and they inject that confidence in them, and they give them examples of their strengths, and they focus on that. And the other thing is training and enablement, which isn't usually going to special courses in Orlando, Florida, and all that stuff. It's usually on the job. It's learning from other people who already know how to do this stuff. It's forcing the practice of these new things. Then your potential in your mind goes up, right? So what if something came along and now you think you have unlimited potential to create this new IT organization? So you believe that. Now you take massive action, right? You take massive action because you know for a fact that this has to happen. What are your results going to be like? And all you did was you believed differently. And I think one of the problems in IT is people stop believing in this force of change primarily, and we love our public cloud partners. The future of VMware is cross-cloud architecture, but primarily because public cloud is forcing innovation. Because if you don't bring innovation, public cloud's going to, right? It's going to happen no matter what. Now that's where your rock stars come from, but it all starts with belief. So the actionable takeaway here is to work on this. Get inside people's heads, survey them. Do they have a growth mindset? What do they believe? And the other thing quickly is mixing people. You want to put your growth mindset people together. And we now have veterans that have been in the industry a really long time, and we have young people coming in. Pair them together. What I see a lot of times is they sit off together. The veterans sit over here. They have all this experience and wisdom. They know so many things that these young people don't know. The young people have all these new experiences and all this energy. Pair these people together so that the veteran can give the experience to the younger, and the younger can give the energy and revitalize the veteran. I like this idea of also gender mixing, ethnicity mixing. Mix different people together instead of having these little cliques.
I think this means I need to put my arm around you now, Craig, and we need to do one of these.
He's going to put his arm around me.
Like this.
Well, keeping it interesting. Thanks, Joseph. Now, just really quick, I like the example. I like the story of Charles Schwab. This is from Covey's book, 7 Habits book that we probably all read. But just as a quick takeaway from that book, Charles Schwab was the first American business person to get $1 million salary. $1 million salary back in the 1920s. And was it because he knew the most about the financial system, or he knew the most about insurance, or he knew the most about steel fabrication? Do you think that's why he got $1 million? Because he was the smartest guy? Had nothing to do with it. His board and he himself would tell you is because of 3 things. The first thing was his ability to encourage other people. He just had this uncanny ability to get people to believe in themselves. The second thing was he was always others-oriented. So when he would talk to people, his customers and his employees, he would talk to them about what's in it for them. This is what's going to make your life better. This is what's going to make your job better. So it was not about him. He never talked about him. Now the third thing, and this is an interesting practice that he did, because he had a steel business, he once went to the night shift, because he thought that they were underperforming. And in steel manufacturing, they're called heats. They make steel heats, and then they make all the steel parts out of the heats. So he went to the team and he said, what's the maximum amount of heats you can make in one night shift? They said 6. We've never made more than 6. He said 6, huh? You don't think any of these processes, you don't think any new cultural behaviors could get you beyond 6? And they're like, no, we just don't have the tools and systems. And he went, okay, 6 is your world record. So he brought this big piece of chalk, and they had a chalkboard back then. They didn't have projectors, obviously. And he wrote a big old 6 on the chalkboard. Very next morning he came into the day shift and he said, hey guys, you know what that 6 is? That's the very best the night shift can do, and it's the very best they believe they'll ever be able to do. What do you think the day shift people did? We can beat those guys. We can do more than 6. They got up to 10 because he always encouraged these new cultures, these new behaviors, and he created a sense of competition. Why am I telling you this? Because as you go to redefine your culture and you're intentional about it, and you make it one of your most important projects, The people on the right of the bell curve that are adopting things, you want to reward that behavior. You want to showcase that in your all hands, your quarterly meetings. You want to say, hey, we created a Tiger team for this project. We're using a new methodology. These guys did it. And it'll incite the other people to wake them up, make them come alive, hopefully. Okay, Joseph is going to talk about process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to start out this way, which is anyone who's familiar with the history of airplanes and the creation of airplanes, this will hit home with, which is when they initially were starting to create airplanes, they were duplicating birds, flapping wings, right? You got the ornithopter here, one of the early methods of trying to do that. And it wasn't until they gave up trying to duplicate things as they exist now that they were successful in creating an airplane that could fly. I think that has a lot of application to when we examine process. We commonly examine process as it exists today, instead of saying, what are we really trying to get done, and innovating on it. And so we become the slaves, or we have the tyranny of the now that affect us. So as we start to talk about process, this is something that's near and dear to everyone's heart, because we all love process, right? Yeah, exactly. No head nods. That's what I thought. We don't love process, right? But it's a nature of our world. We need to focus a little bit differently. So the first thing I look at in process is the value chain. I think this should be fairly known by everyone in the room, but really this is a conversation about what does IT do and who do they interact with to produce value ultimately to the shareholders, right? So we're going to start out at the side that VMware often starts out on, the infrastructure side. Infrastructure exists to provide services to application developers, right? It's a service provider. If there was no applications, there would be no need for infrastructure at the end of the day. Well, the application developers provide services to the business users. The business users consume those services and provide that value to shareholders. And ultimately, the end customers are the benefit of that whole thing. But one thing that is critical is this. Every one of these things provides value. If we've got rid of infrastructure in this chain, everything falls down. Every single one of these things are there. When I worked in IT, most of the time I had no idea, other than an acronym, what that application did or why it did it. That's a huge loss, because I didn't understand the cultural benefit of what I was doing or why it mattered to the company. When we start to think about that and we become dismissive of infrastructure and its value in this chain, you start to think about it, most of the projects fail because of infrastructure either taking too long, not delivering what's expected, or being too far disconnected from the end product to really understand what's going on. And it happens within the silos that we had there. So when we start to think about this, it's important when we're redesigning processes to start out with the end customer in mind and understand what the outcome is for that person, right? Are you building infrastructure for the sake of building infrastructure? No. You're building it to provide a business service that provides value to your company. That's why it exists. So start to think about your processes in that way. Another key component of processes that I like to think about is this. We're going to talk a little bit about constraint management. So whether you're manufacturing like Charles Schwab was, or whether you're dealing with IT processes today, you have this exact same situation in every process you do. There is a request, there is a wait time till somebody services it, whether it's automation or human, and then there's a work time or process time that can't change, and that gets done. The reality is most of our projects are a bunch of these put together. And I'll just take the standard infrastructure chain to make it easier for visibility right here, right? We provision a server. We provision networking. We provision middleware. We provide some application code into it, and then we hand it off to a developer who either tests or does something with it. That is the value chain that is there. Now, if we take a look at this, as it is right now, you're going to see that there's a lot of constraints. There's a lot of wait time that we've inserted at the front of this. I would suggest that there actually is only one constraint in this process. Because you can spend as much time as you would like on enhancing server or enhancing middleware. And if you don't move the big rock in the middle, in this case networking and security, which is not always that, but that's my example. If you don't move that rock and reduce that one constraint, any gain anywhere else is totally useless, because you're still waiting just as long for the big one. So you need to focus on the constraint that matters. There's a quote from Dr. Goldat that I love, And I think this is absolutely the thing. We often attack these problems from saying we have to do some grandiose monstrosity to fix this problem. Just go do one. Remove the major constraint. And once that major constraint is done and out of the way and fixed, you'll identify the new major constraint. It's somewhere else. Go fix that and keep working on it. It's an iterative process that allows you to gain benefits over time instead of we're going to do a massive project to fix everything. It becomes overwhelming, right? Aligned with that is an innovation framework. So by a show of hands in the room, how many of you have a formalized process for innovation in your company?
Come on.
Hands, come on. I got 2 hands.
Formalized process for innovation in your company.
Come on.
Everybody
Who's got
awake?
One? Nobody? I got like 3 hands. Okay. So
you got 3. Okay.
So that's good. Let's talk about it because that's a really great conversation then. So this is a process that's been sanitized a little bit that VMware uses with its application developers, which is we allow any application developer to come to the table with an innovation, something they think will benefit the end customer. And they're given 1 to 2 weeks to go build a prototype for that. Go make that work. After 1 to 2 weeks, they bring it back to management and they say, here's what I've built. And this is great. Think about the impact on the culture. You have a great idea, go fix it. And imagine the amount of time that that person spends during that 1 or 2 weeks working on that problem. We may get a month's worth of work out of them in that 1 week because it's something they're passionate about fixing. They bring it back, the team reviews it, and if they identify that there is a business outcome and a benefit there, they pass it on to the next stage, which is a team of 5 people to do for a month. Go build it. Go prototype it. And then show it to the business. Show if it's valuable. And that persists down the pipeline. And obviously, as you can see, the level of certainty and the level of investment improves as we go along till we get to the point where we have a product that we actually release to mainstream, which has a high cost, right, but has a benefit. I suggest that if you're looking to modify your culture, you should consider creating an innovation framework like this, not just for developers, but for infrastructure and for everyone in your company. How can you be innovative? And we're going to let you go be innovative for a week or a day or whatever it is. Go figure out if that's a viable thing that's going to solve a problem for us and build it. When we're looking at innovation, we have a couple guiding principles, and I'll build this out for you. The first one is, quite simply, does this innovation have any benefit to the business? Because there's lots of innovations that don't, right? Lots of benefits to me, but not to the business. So you have to evaluate it against that. And if it doesn't pass that sniff test, it probably shouldn't get through. Number 2, do we already have something? Is there something existing right now that we're just duplicating or enhancing? Should we just go enhance that instead? Number 3, is there a vendor who can provide that to me? Why am I going to build something that I can buy? Why would I take on that technical debt? It's just insane. Number 4, is there money? Greatest innovation in the world, but if we can't convince everybody to fund it, there's no point in moving forward on that innovation, right? And I like this one. Can we fund it long term? There's one more, by the way, for those of you that are taking pictures, and I'll leave it up long enough for you to take a picture. So can we fund it long term and more broadly? Of course. Initial state is one thing. 3 years is another. Are we willing to do that? And then really the change management conversation, right? What does it look like for lifecycle management, day 2 operations? Is this something that we can, as a company, take on a business model around? Now, all of these things are for big deal innovation, but does these same things matter when you're talking about innovating one process? Remember that little process thing I was talking about? Yes, it does. Does it benefit? We have to start to be more business-centric in our conversations. So as I think about it, I wanted to ask the question. I've had many years in IT, and I wanted to think about what influences IT process the most. So I'm going to build this out. Outcomes, people, organizational structure, requirements. I hope that influences the process the most. I get some smiles out of that. It's funny. Requirements should drive the process, right? Knowledge, our reactivity, existing processes, that's a big one. Innovation, the complex systems, our skill sets. When I think about IT as it is today, the thing that influences our processes the most is this: risk mitigation. We have become a risk-averse organization because ultimately we own all the risk. When something goes down, we're the ones that get the call. We're the ones that have to own that. So I want to talk about some things that we can do to help overcome this risk mitigation in our processes. The first one is a sandwich. So when a customer asks for something, they're expecting a sandwich. There's 5 ingredients in my sandwich, and it's pretty basic, right? And I can tell you, once you bite into that sandwich, if you've got bad lettuce or bad mayonnaise, it's very easy to troubleshoot the problem. But because we are a risk-averse group, and because we have a culture of risk aversion, what we ultimately end up with is the Dagwood. It's very hard to troubleshoot which slice of cheese has gone bad in this thing and what the cause of the problem is. Everyone cakes on their layer of protection and risk mitigation, and we ultimately end up taking a simple product into a very complex product. So this has happened everywhere. You start out very simple and it becomes a monstrosity. So I'd like to talk about the one thing that I think will make a big difference in getting away from the sandwich problem. Everyone owns quality. Every single person in an organization has to own quality. This means that when you configure something on a switch or configure something on a server, there has to be a verification step, automated verification, that that was configured correctly. Because right now, our software testers, we have a QA department for software. Do we have a QA department for our infrastructure services? No, we don't have that. We just assume that by automating, we're going to create no variation, that we're going to create no need for inspection, and that we're going to create no errors, and we're going to have quality delivery. And I will say that automation means none of these things. Just because you've automated, it doesn't mean that there aren't variables that are not part of the automation. It doesn't mean that you don't need to look at it, and doesn't mean you take a look at it. To me, quality is defined quite simply as automated, functional, and unit testing. You do something, you have to have a way to prove that it was done right. If we start to do that at every layer, the risk mitigation concerns that we have go away. Think about it. I can prove that every step of that was done right. And if it wasn't, then we'll just repeat that step till it's done right, or rinse and repeat the whole thing. We've got to test close to the source, and it's got to be owned by the same people that build it, so that everybody owns quality. Developers own quality, infrastructure people own quality. Everyone in the thing has to own quality and test it. We have to have peer reviews, and that reduces our risk ultimately and starts to move us away from being a risk mitigation organization. The other thing that I'd like to talk about that I think is a huge benefit is the idea of small batch processes. So let's examine that I'm building a deck, and I have my cutter here, and I'm cutting the boards, and I need 50 boards. Now I can cut all 50 boards the right length before I start laying them down. And me as an efficiency sort of fellow, I think that's the smart idea. Cut them all, paint them all, then put them all down. What happens if I shift on the 11th board and I miscut all the boards from 12 through 50? They all get thrown away, they're all useless, and I've got wasted time. So when we start to think about this, we have to start to think about how we can create infrastructure, how can we create components in smaller batches. So this is a traditional process for IT that I see. I think the term waterfall applies to this for most people, if you're wondering. We build a project, we get all the inputs, it's a monster. You know, some organizations spend 6 to 9 months doing this, and then we get approval, we architect it, we build it, we test it, and we fail. Because we just spent 1.5 years building a monstrosity, and we only test it when we get to the end. We only verify that it meets the requirements. And by the way, because it's taken so long to do, the requirements have changed completely. May I suggest that we move to this model? That we instead break it into single steps, one board at a time. Now this seems like it would be a waste, right? Cut a board, put it in place. But how else are we going to verify that quality is there? We do the work, we verify it, and then we are done and we pass to the next step. When you start to look at that from a project standpoint, because it's reasonable, at the top I've got a project, at the bottom I just have one input, right? This is what it looks like. We still do a project ingestion process. I don't think I can change that unless we're talking about CEO level. We have an approval. We have an architect who takes batches, breaks it into batches, and takes batches that exist today, architects them together, input, output, input, output, input, output, with testing at each stage. And now we've got a completed project, and we can get to a viable outcome much faster. This is the Griffiths law. That's me, Joseph Griffiths. This is like Conway's law, but I co-opted this one.
He has his own law.
The truth of the matter is that I see that most processes match organizational structures, not customer outcomes, That's the sandwich. Every single organizational structure that has to touch it puts a new layer on the sandwich and keeps building it up. And so Craig's going to talk a little about org structures.
Move along. Yeah, so thanks, Joseph. This section usually gets a lot of interest for people. How do you change your team structure? How do you change your roles? If you have a traditional role now and you want to move to a future-facing role in team organization, what exactly does that look like? And too often I hear people say, you need to change your team structure and your roles, but they don't tell you exactly what to do, and it frustrates me. So I want to be a little bit specific. The first thing, though, is the very first thing with culture change and transformation has to be the alignment to business outcomes. So when you build a future state roadmap, an execution plan for your IT organization, you have to tie that back to the things that, the 4 M's, by the way, the things that are going to make the company more profitable. Your CEO and the board care about only a few things. They care about shareholder value. They care about a deeper relationship with your customers. They care about customer experience. So when you're designing applications and customer-facing things, it has to make the customer experience better. They care about new revenue streams. They care about reducing operating expenses, of course. We can't leave that out. And they also care about the employee experience. So those are kind of the things. So if you look at all the different business outcomes that IT can impact, and your team doesn't communicate up through the CIO and above with some of these types of topics that we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to just kind of throw them up here. And by the way, we have our business cards here, and we will send you these decks directly, or you can download them later, so don't worry about pictures and notes. Unless you're too shy to grab a business card, then take pictures. These are all the different sorts of things that I think that apply to almost any industry. IT can impact almost any of these things and make your company better and raise that level of relationship that IT has beyond back office, keep the lights on, to front office business growth, right? So these are just some ideas on, a lot of times people go, well, how do I take IT and all these techie cool things I do and talk to my CFO about it? That's scary, that's hard, I'm not used to that. Just use these words for the outcomes that technology can deliver. That's all you have to do. It's not, obviously there's more to it than that if you want to get into net present value and all these calculations, but just in terms of using their language, I think it's this easy. And when we talked about culture before and establishing a culture, my friend Kevin, the Clear Choice CEO, remember he said you have to be very intentional about it. It has to be one of your priorities. I said, Kevin, how do you do it though? Like, what are the steps? And now this is where people start rolling their eyes and going, this is cheesy, right? But he said, establish your company's values. At VMware, our values are very well known. Epic 2 values, look it up on the website, right? Execution, passion, integrity, customers, and community. Those are our values. We should all have those memorized. We should know what those are. What is the vision of your business? So what are the aspirational goals of your company? And then what is your team's purpose in that vision? And then what are your team's operating principles? Operating principles are the actions by which you have performance conversations, you have reward conversations, and it all ties back. And I've had these conversations inside of VMware, and sometimes people, oh, this is cheesy stuff. It's not. This is how you turn it around. Now here's some examples of, and these are just made up by me, so maybe you have some better ones, and I bet you do. Values that enterprise IT groups can believe in, communicate, remind people of constantly. High trust between groups, as an example. If you're going to have integrated blended teams, which we'll talk about in a minute because I want to show some org structure changes, they have to trust each other. They can't say, oh, that's the network guys. The security people keep us from doing anything, you know. I'm not going to talk about all these because of time, but being proactive also is a really, really key one. You take these values, you convert them to operating principles. Now, these are things you can actually do. So if you have high trust, you can create blended services teams. If you are going to be proactive, if you're going to have business relationship management, then you have to use a design theory, design modeling, which means rather than taking requests from your business on what they need from technology, if they're just telling you, they're seeing it through their lens. This is a really big problem that enterprise IT has a lot of times. I've been at 2 organizations before I came to VMware where we implemented a role for going out into the business, but we never just heard from them what they needed. We literally put on our hard hats, literally in one case, and went out into the field and spent a couple days with them to look at what they're trying to do through the lens of what we know technology can do for them. Now, again, I said at the very beginning of this presentation, a lot of you are already doing a lot of this stuff, so I apologize if you're mature in this way, but a lot of organizations I don't think are. Now, if you look at this traditional IT organization, by the way, Kevin Leese, he eats, sleeps, and breathes this stuff. So if you really want to get into new roles and new IT org structures and the path, go to that session right there on Wednesday morning at 8:30, which means if you're out seeing Snoop Dogg and Run DMC, you know, make sure you have plenty of water, because I know those parties are going to be fun. Kevin's going to be talking all about this. But when you look at this traditional IT structure, this is just an example. You will see silos. Now, silos aren't a bad word. You know, people, Keith back there in the back of the room introduced me to this term called silo huggers, where they're like, no network guys are going to touch vCenter, for example. That's my baby. So you see a lot of silos. I don't think silos are ever going to completely go away, or at least not in the next 5 years. You're going to have them, but I think we're going to have fewer of them. In a traditional IT model, you see a lack of service orientation. So a service is something that IT does for the business that might have 29 different components behind it, that you have a service owner that understands that, right? Traditional IT models usually don't have service management. Now, not the bloated ITIL service management. There's nothing like ITIL to make you feel like you're standing in on 200 pounds of concrete, right? Overly governing things. But this traditional model also results a longer mean time to repair for new projects and for fixing broken things, because the ticket comes in and it goes to a technical function. It goes to the DBA. We think it's in the database. So you have this DBA getting all these tickets and all these people standing over their shoulder. It's really a problem with the analytics service, right? Or the mobile banking app, or whatever this service is. Think about a service. But everybody's going over that person's shoulder because there isn't a service owner and there isn't a service manager. Very painful. Now, what we're suggesting here is that you move to an integrated services lifecycle. And we have here cloud services teams, infrastructure, cloud services teams, kind of the same thing. Infrastructure, people like the word infrastructure in there. They can relate to it better. But now you have service brokers. And this doesn't, you know, not everybody has an IT organization with 1,000 people in it. Not everybody can go build greenfield new service management teams. A lot of this is brownfield. A lot of times these are part-time roles. So think about that. This isn't like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do service. Sometimes it's full-time, sometimes it's part-time. The services are consumable by the business, and you might have since we're at VMworld, you might have a cloud broker functionality in your cloud services team, for example, where that person is predicting the cost, predicting the security posture, and you even at the platform layer, application development capabilities within clouds. It's not just storage and compute and all the infrastructure-y things, right? But the ticket, the request, is going to come into the service manager. Now, the service manager is either going to give net new service back, or they're going to work on the problem, but they own it. So you don't go to the DBA, you don't go to the network person. There's more ownership. You're not throwing things over the wall to operations. Now, they're going to look into the problem, and they're going to determine if it's infrastructure or not, but they own that service. So you're not going to escalate it all over the place and ping-pong it. Now, what you have here is you have less handoffs between teams, faster time to resolution. So in this new organization model, and I had multiple slides on the SRE role. Everybody's always talking about that. I don't think I'll have time to talk about that. Send me an email, we can talk about that. Where do they come from? Do SREs come from infrastructure, or do they come from apps? The answer is it depends on like 10 different things, but happy to talk about it later. But the thing I want to point out here is you have to have an active executive sponsor for a new service-oriented IT model. And that, if it's not your CIO and you're the VP of infrastructure and operations, it has to be you. But if you're not walking the talk and you're not exhibiting a growth mindset, for example, open to new ideas, raising your hand and asking. We run into a lot of IT executives that sit on an ivory throne and will not let us suggest anything. And I don't want to be offensive, but it's like, we've got some good ideas, and so do the people on your team, and they won't have it. So if you don't have an active sponsor, it's not going to work. You're going to have business unit ties into app-based services, or you might have business relationship manager roles. Now, this alone is a week-long workshop. It could be the development of the business relationship manager. It's not an order taker, right? I actually just forgot to have a slide talk about the maturity of that role, so I'll get to that in a minute. But the business relationship manager role has a job down into IT and out to the business. Oftentimes they report to the CIO. Sometimes they don't. So sometimes they have roundtable frameworks with the CIO and they report into the business. But this role is critical, I think, in a new IT culture. If you have these blended teams, you can avoid all these mistakes. Especially the not understanding the full 360-degree architecture of that service. Just a real brief mention, really, really good engineers don't have to get promoted into being solution architects, and good solution architects don't have to be promoted into enterprise architects. It's perfectly okay and wonderful and awesome just to be a principal engineer and be the most technically amazing person in the world, because it's very different skill sets. I think you should have job descriptions for every role. Enterprise architecture is more about business than it is technology if it's done right. Solution architecture, they're not building things. They're doing component level capabilities and functionality to build into a solution, including cultural aspects. So solution architecture and engineering are different. Really good engineers might be terrible solution architects. Really good solution architects might be terrible engineers. So just make sure you differentiate. There is a maturity model with BRM role. A lot of times BRMs are just stuck as order takers. They don't have a budget, they don't have a team. They're just saying, hey, go stand up this site. We won this big RFP in the Alaska oil fields and go build me a data center. They're not looking 6 to 12 months out, understanding what that line of business is going to need. They're not helping with capacity management, capacity planning, back to the cloud services team because they know what's going on. But as you can see, there's a maturity model with the BRM role. And I actually have some timelines on how you develop this role and what the considerations are, because it is a process that I'd be happy to send you later. Quick mention about, since we're talking about culture, last year at this same talk I said, everybody should be mentoring somebody and everybody should have a mentor. And what I found is that formal process is too intimidating. So as you go along your cultural change, I don't think you need to go say, hey, will you mentor me? Because it's just a commitment that hardly ever works. If you've ever asked someone to mentor you or they've asked you to mentor them, you say, okay, I'll run as hard as you want to run. Go do these 3 things, come back to me in 2 weeks, and then we'll go from there. 95% of the time, nothing happens. So just go to somebody you respect who's been through what you're trying to go through, and just ask them for help and ask them for advice in a particular thing. When that thing comes up, you do that 3, 4, 5, 10 times, they've become your mentor without naming it that, right? So that's just easier. And then the who's next is just, in your culture, always have a succession plan for every role that you have. So not only do you have job descriptions for everybody, you have a succession plan. Joseph, we have very little time left.
Yep, I get to talk about everybody's favorite topic, KPIs, and I've got a very short time to do it, which is a good thing to be at, everybody. So those of you that are metrics driven are gonna love this. The rest of you, bear with me for 3 slides. How's that sound? So I want to tell a quick story that I really appreciate. I was working with a large healthcare company here in the United States a while ago, and we spent a lot of time helping them try to come together with transformational things. And ultimately, I discovered that they had created a KPI that was driving behavior and culture. They had had a number of high visibility outages. And so they created a culture and a KPI related to availability. So if you caused an impact to availability of services, unscheduled availability, it would affect your MBO. It would affect your boss's MBO. It would affect his MBO and her MBO and everybody's MBO up the chain all the way to the CIO. So if the engineer changed something that caused an impact on availability, the CIO took an impact. Now think about the impact of that KPI and that measurement on the organization. They were averse to every change possible. In fact, they didn't make changes. Everyone got together during a failure and blamed somebody else for it. They didn't fix problems. This KPI paralyzed this organization from moving forward. And all it was trying to do was make sure we have higher availability. Ultimately, they ended up in a situation where they had created bigger problems than they were trying to solve with this KPI. So as we start to talk about those KPIs, a good idea can turn into a bad idea really quickly, really unhappy, right? Another measurement in digital KPIs that I want you to consider is failure. I think that Craig's talked a lot about the fixed versus growth mindset and the ability to fail, but I think we're not actually given that much room to fail in our lives. We're not given that much success. Thomas Edison failed we don't know how many times before he built the light bulb that became his famous creation. And there were lots of people that failed trying to create that before him and after him as well. Failure is the steps that we take to succeeding. So if we can create a measurement around failure within a short period of time, it can't be forever, right? Again, that small batch concept, and measure that as a positive KPI, think about the value of that and what you're encouraging people to do. Let's talk about some common KPIs that exist in IT. So uptime is a traditional KPI. I really like acceptable downtime. You get the same thing. Those of you that are not familiar with the Google term of acceptable downtime, it is this. You are allowed to make changes and do stuff until you hit the acceptable downtime, 1% of outage. Until you hit that, you can keep making changes. As soon as you hit that, you stop making changes for the month. Next month, you start over again. Think about how much that changes versus uptime SLA, which really means keep it up always. Doesn't matter, as long as, it's total difference in the two. When we start to think about incidents closed, how about percentage of incidents that are closed without escalations? One team can handle that problem every time. That's a great value. Number of changes versus the number of automated changes. Hours of work done versus number of hours of proactive work done before we have a problem fixing it. And one of my favorites, time to close tickets. Who's run into that one? Versus customer experience on tickets. Because we all know that people can close tickets quickly, but that's totally different than experience at the end of the day. All right, so we've talked about these 4 different towers: culture of change, growth mindset, customer-centric batch processes, focus on the customer, make them smaller, make them quality testing, integrated teams, which is what Craig talked a lot about, and the digital KPIs that support the behavior. And all of these together allow us to create culture change as we go across it. All right.
So we're basically done. We want to leave you with a call to action that we're not going to talk through, but actionable steps, they'll be in the deck here. We want to say thank you. A lot of reading by Gene Kim. Mark Suttle is a wonderful guy who wrote a great book on a lot of this stuff. Yeah. And mostly our customers. Mostly it's our interaction with all of our customers is where we learn these things. Please fill out your survey. If you don't fill out your survey, then we won't be able to do this ever again. So it's, but if it was terrible, then we won't be able to do this ever again anyway. So hopefully it was worth something, right? Thank you very much. Our contact information is here. Our business cards are here. Happy to talk to any of you about this stuff in the future. Thanks for coming.
And we'll take any questions you have if you wanted to.